Hi, this is Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. This is our weekly, or actually our quarterly live show where we go over the top events in ICS security over the month. Before I bring on my guest for this live show, I just want to remind everyone one last time that S424 tickets go on sale next Monday. So if you're watching this live, it's next Monday. If you're watching it taped, it's October 2nd. You'll want to get your ticket if you know you're coming. You'll want to get your ticket in the first 36 hours because we hold the ticket one price of $15.95 plus tax for the first 36 hours. And we do that so that everyone has a chance to get the best price across all time zones. So you don't have to wake up early. You don't have to log in right at midnight or 12:01 Monday morning Eastern Daylight Time. But you'll have 36 hours and you'll get the best price. And typically what happens is the price will go up like $400 if you miss that 36-hour window. And it gets to like the 250 to 500 range. I expect we'll sell about 300 or 400 tickets in those first 36 hours. So the place to go is s4xevents.com. Liz will be putting up some banners from time to time to remind you. But with that, let's, as people are coming on board, let us know you're coming on board. Put something in the comments. We do want to hear your comments and questions. But my guest for this episode, Liz, if you could bring Patrick up, is Patrick Miller. He is the CEO of Ampere Security. Did I get that right? I actually didn't write that down. I always think of Ampere. What's the official name of your company?
Yeah. The official name is Ampere Industrial Secury.
But the logo just says Ampere, right?
It does. Yeah, I'm changing that to say industrial security so I don't get confused with anyone. But yeah.
And you're the founder and CEO of the company, and it's primarily a consulting company in this space,
Yeah,
right?
services only. Yeah, we don't do software, hardware. We're pure services. Boutique, a specialized consulting firm for the industrial space, of course. And we focus primarily on, of course, the industrial cybersecurity, physical security things, but also all of the regulations, legislation, standards, that kind of thing. So our tagline is we keep you ahead of your adversaries and your auditors. So that's our sweet spot.
And where does this podcast find you? Where are you these days?
This week I'm in Copenhagen, and next week I'm in Bilbao. Last week I was in Tallinn. So yeah, I'm all over the planet at the moment. But I think it's early your time and late my time. I think we're about 12 hours apart.
Yeah, we are 12 hours apart. And do you do much in Europe? Because for me, Europe, I was just in Europe, and it was a trip I don't do that often for work because it's so long. But you spend some time in Europe?
Yeah. I've got a couple of clients here now, and I've had other clients in the past, and I've got some prospects I'm working on. But of course, for us, we all buy from the same vendors, right? There's vendors that are global vendors. If you're in the US or Europe or South America, you're all buying the same stuff. So the equipment is basically the same. The only thing that changes is kind of like the local practices or culture, in addition to the legislation or laws or standards in that area. Even things like in the US, we use a lot of NIST, and in Europe, they use a lot of ICS 62443. So there's some subtle differences, but by and large, it's all the same thing. It's just different people.
Well, we're going to dive into, so in these live episodes, we cover the top 3 stories of the quarter, and then we do wins, fails, and predictions. And we're going to come back from Europe to the United States for the first story. It's funny, Patrick, when I'm doing the stories, I think even when we were going back and forth, we could have had 3 big stories on what the U.S. government is doing. They are putting out so much information. They're kind of flooding the zone. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but the 2 I want to talk about here as our first story is this quarter, they issued the U.S. National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan. And then CISA followed that up about a month later with their 2024-2026 strategic plan. Starting with the National Cybersecurity Strategy implementation, that document included 65 high-impact initiatives. I wrote down in my notes that a lot of them were bureaucratic. Publish this policy, create this sort of thing. There were some that were more, and for example, one of them was part of the strategy was DOD needed to publish a cyber strategy document. So you got to get strategies on top of strategies. I have more comments on the other document, but what did you think about the implementation plan?
I think even taking it back to the actual, national cybersecurity strategy, that in and of itself was probably the best one of those I've seen ever. It was bold, and it's got its criticisms, and I totally understand those criticisms and echo them in a lot of ways. But for what it is a really good summary of the issues today and solid ways to solve them. Of course, all those hurdles are still there. We can talk about those with the implementation plan and try to solve some of that. But it was actually very well written. It was long enough, but still short. I got a lot of really good things to say about it, despite all the usual criticisms. So with the implementation plan, I think that was the biggest criticism was, okay, this is lofty. How are you really going to do all this stuff? I mean, is there any way that you could actually do these things? And there was so much pushback around, work with the legislative bodies and how much, kind of guaranteed friction they're going to have trying to push any new law through today. But that said, I mean, there was a lot of, discussion around could you even do these things right now in this political climate? And my first response was, the answer to that is definitely yes, and it's not for the reasons you would typically think. I go back to when we were trying to do some of this in the wake of the 2003 blackout. We're trying to push regulation into the electric sector. So this is a while back, taking way back machine. And what they ended up with was in the Federal Power Act or Energy Policy Act in 2005, a couple of years later, they hung the entire body of the NERC-CIP standards, which became this multi-billion-dollar regulatory regime afterward, on literally one sentence that said, "Oh yeah, by the way, cybersecurity." Paraphrasing, of course, but it's effectively the same thing. So what they did was they used any possible method they could, which at the time was this kludgy structure that FERC had, and NERC wasn't even a regulatory body, but they used that as this toehold to make everything else happen. And ostensibly the political climates are different. I get that, but even that aside, my first thought was you're going to see the same thing happen, and we saw it relatively quickly. EPA immediately took the baselines, the CPGs, the cyber performance goals from DHS, and basically said, "Hey, water sector, these are your new regulations." For all intents and purposes, that's the same thing happened, right? And they didn't do it in a way that said, EPA has now this new authority that's been granted to them by Congress. They basically took their existing authority that said sanitary surveys. They have the authority to dictate how sanitary surveys are conducted in the water sector, and it includes basically the technology for sanitary water provision. And they said, well, cybersecurity is, technology. So we're just going to add on to that, and we're going to push this as your new kind of quasi-regulation. So I expect every other, area that's looking for some direction to get into these things, we use those same methods to get a lot of this moving forward. So that's a long way of saying, in addition to the implementation plan, everybody else is already doing what they need to do behind the scenes to make some of this national cybersecurity strategy come to reality. Because there was a lot of moving parts behind the scenes to make that whole thing happen. So I think it's a good thing,
Well, and it's necessary. I mean,
it is.
You can throw stones at it. I'm not sure how much it accomplishes at the end of the day, but it's good to have a strategy document. It's good to have an implementation plan. If I was to give them one positive comment on the implementation plan, was each one of those 65 initiatives was assigned to an agency and had a complete by date. So
Yes.
if you have a plan, that's a plan. That's not just, hey, these are things we'd like to do. It's here's what we'd like to do. Here's who's supposed to do it. Here's when they have to have it done by. And you're seeing some of those get checked off. I think for me, the harder thing is always, are these things of value? Are these things what we should be doing? Which, if we could pivot more to the CISA doc, because I think that's a little more directly applicable to most of our viewers and listeners. Because those implementation plans kind of flow, some of them flow down to CISA, and they put out a document, a 2024 to 2026 strategic plan that talked about what they're going to do. And I found that to be a much more interesting document, much more applicable to this audience. It had 3 goals: address immediate threats, harden the terrain, and drive security at scale. Pretty generic, pretty normal. But what I really liked about it was they had some really measurable objectives, or actually they call them measures of effectiveness. So they had objectives and then measures of effectiveness. Before I go into those, did you have any other aspects about it that you really liked or disliked?
I did like when you go to the web page, it kind of advertises what they're doing. I like those, address immediate threats is the first one. Second, harden the terrain. I get these. And then it said drive security at scale. And when I first read that, I was like, okay, this sounds like marketing BS. I expect to see this like on someone's booth at RSA. But then I read the following sentence and I've got it written down just because I wanted to restate it. Drive security at scale by prioritizing cybersecurity as a fundamental safety issue, which I think is key, and ask more of technology providers to build security into products throughout their life cycle, which you've been asking for. Things like ship products with secure defaults, you've also been asking for. But this one, foster radical transparency into their security practices so that customers clearly understand the risks they're accepting by using each product. That one I thought was the most interesting of them all, and frankly, somewhat new. Not new because it doesn't align with the cybersecurity strategy in a lot of ways, but that this is also being echoed in this implementation plan or this strategy as well. So to me, that stood out as we're likely going to see something here because it's being repeated and echoed in a similar way through multiple different layers.
When you
I don't
talk
know what
about
that means.
when you talk about scale too, they highlight, and they have in a number of their documents, what some people call the cyber poor, others call small, medium, and that sort of thing, or people with not a lot of money or perceived to have not a lot of money to spend on
Yeah.
cybersecurity. And I always have trouble with that because in my mind, the main mission of CISA should be to protect the critical infrastructure that would have the biggest impact on the country as a whole. And that you do certain things to achieve that. But then they've taken the position, and it might be their direction, given the pressures on them, to say we have to also deal with the mom and pop or the small municipal water or some little 10-person company that manufactures something in their back room. We have to worry about them having ransomware or certain things. And I think those two efforts are almost, I guess contradictory would be too strong, but you would take almost completely different approaches to achieve those two missions. So I worry about distracting from the critical infrastructure mission by saying we're also going to do this other one that's quite different.
Okay, I get your point, and I think there may be a subtle difference that often gets commingled. And I do think you're right. They should be focusing on the critical infrastructure components that are the most critical. They know what they are. Those companies know who they are, and they're usually not mom and pop shops. They're not small operations with a small footprint or less funding, that kind of thing. They're usually larger organizations, often investor owned, private equity owned, or even in some cases foreign owned. But I think the other component that kind of gets, I don't know, often looped into this or brought in is that cyber liability component, so that those smaller organizations have less pressure on the vendors and less pressure on other parties from which they're buying hardware, software services to actually make a difference on them. So they can't, if mom and pop shops ask for, secure by design or secure defaults or even software bill of materials, they're not going to get very far. But if these bigger shops did, they likely would. So I think they're trying to help some of those smaller organizations, I guess, raise that cyber poverty line in a different way. I don't know if those are well articulated in terms of the differences of who they're trying to help. But I do agree with you in that there's a lot of focus on, because even when we had discussion when we were writing or assisting with writing some of the CPGs under DHS, I kept echoing the same thing from them, that they wanted to help these smaller organizations and it really needs to be readable by them. So I do see a lot of that in there, and I think that's a legitimate complaint. But that said, these larger organizations, arguably, they have more resources to do something, but they're also the biggest targets. So
Yep.
I'm on the fence. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that it's wrong. I'm not sure the same organization should be doing both, but you could say, CISA has been getting more and more responsibilities. I mean, it's got a lot of it's congressional's fault or Congress's fault because they just came. Oh, CISA should do this. CISA should do this. CISA, they keep asking them to do more. They keep giving them more money, so it's under their purview. And perhaps they have two completely different groups working these things. But I see some of the documents that come out kind of commingle them, which worries me a little bit. But let's drive into this measures of effectiveness, because this is what I really liked and what I'm going to be watching most closely. First, I'd have to say that they had a document last year, the strategic plan for 2023 to 2025, and it had measures of effectiveness. They weren't as good, they weren't as measurable, but they also were never. I mean, they came out in the document. We never saw anything. We never saw, hey, this is where we are. This is what we did. So it's great that you put them down that, hey, these are how we're going to measure ourselves. But there was never any public information that I saw that measured, said, hey, we did a great job on these three. Okay job on these two. We completely failed on these. And so I think that's going to be key is I'm going to be watching to say this. They say, this is how we're going to measure ourselves. And they even say, we're going to fail fast. From the document, it says, where we determine that a given program, service, or capability is not resulting in expected impacts, we will be disciplined in failing fast and making best use of our resources to pivot with agility. So I'm expecting, if they actually are following this strategic plan, that they should, a year from now, say, hey, we did really bad at this one. We're going to change our approach. We're going to change our measure, something of that nature. So that I'm going to really be looking at that. And just to filibuster a little bit more, I would expect if you're going to measure these things, fiscal year starts in a couple of days. I would expect that they would have a measure. They'd say, here's where we are today. Here's where we are, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years. It's a 3-year plan. But if they don't actually have the measures today, I don't know how they're going to determine if their efforts are improving them or not. I'll pause there. Then I'll go over some of the measures that I found most interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Having been a regulator before, measurement is the hardest part. You can have the worst regulation or worst standard, but measured well can actually be better than a really, really awesome standard that's measured poorly. I mean, it really comes down to how you do the monitoring and enforcement components. So when I read those, and I had the same complaints that you did around what was measured, what were the results? Were these based on what you saw last year? And if so, why? Was this some sort of like lessons learned approach? We don't have any insight into that. That kind of transparency, I think, should be key for us to really buy into these things. We're not getting that. And Ron's point to only measure of success we get is from OIG reports. True, right? I mean, the GAO and others and inspector generals that provide what little insight we get, and that's done after the fact, basically through a forced audit structure. In most cases, it's not volunteered. So what I want to see, to your point, Dale, is I want to see what's the baseline. Where are you starting from first?
Yeah.
Like, did you at least assess yourself to know where you're starting from? And then we can measure success based on your own measurements. I don't care. These are the best ones I've seen so far. I agree. So let's take those. And then let's decide, from your measurements, whether or not you're succeeding. And I don't know who's making these judgment calls internally, externally. Do they have some external input? Because as their own, to use a phrase, is you can't smell your own breath. It's hard to measure yourself. So in this case, I would like to see them have some additional objective approaches to how they're getting measured, some objective outsiders possibly, to minimize that subjective influence. But I would love to see them actually produce these metrics and show what they're doing, how they're doing, what constitutes success or failure. Is there a threshold or a line? I mean, how do you know what's working and what's not working? And failing fast may just mean that, because in the industrial space especially, we move slow on purpose because people die if we move too fast, just to take it to a logical extreme. Bad things happen when things move fast in our space. So we're going to move slow on purpose for valid reasons. So I don't know. I would like to see how those things match up with just the culture and mindset approaches that are so necessary in our world.
Well, let's dig in. So there's like any document, some of the measures of success or measures of effectiveness are a little more squishy. But I picked some of the ones that could be measured and you'd get hard numbers. So for example, increase in the average number of cybersecurity performance goals effectively adopted by organizations across each critical infrastructure sector. Now, this probably would be a survey, right?
Yeah.
I doubt you'd go out and audit these. I don't know that they have the authority or that's practical, but you could say, okay, we're going to send this to pipeline, large water, and critical manufacturing. And we're going to send this out. We should have sent it out actually in September so we could get our baseline in October. And then we're going to send it out in September of next year. And we'll get a delta there, and we'll see, are we meeting that goal? There was a follow-on goal to that, where possible, reduction in confirmed impactful incidents in organizations that have adopted a higher number of cybersecurity performance goals. So if you have that survey that says, I know these people are implementing more cybersecurity goals, and you might put them in buckets, most, partial, little, or something like that. And now you have a requirement for them to report security incidents. You now should be able to get us that number. Now, my guess on that one is you're going to see very little. I think, which will be interesting if you say doing the cybersecurity performance goals has little impact on that. That'll be an interesting discussion, but we should be seeing those numbers.
We should. Notice it's very cyber performance goal centric, and a lot of that comes back from the national security memorandum that created all of this. But they're really trying to push those. They're voluntary, and I expect that surveys will go out. I mean, of course, we'll see like the Sector 5, the original ones that were named, water, wastewater, chemical, gas pipelines, and electric. We'll see those first. They'll probably get the surveys first. And this is, of course, voluntary, but my suspicion is, as was worded even back in the National Security Memorandum, and again echoed in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, almost verbatim, was through this approach, they're going to, harmonize regulatory standards across these organizations or these verticals. What that means is if you don't report, they're going to assume nothing is being done and regulation will follow. So I certainly recommend participating in these as much as you can for what you're willing to divulge, to get them some information so they don't have this, nature abhors a vacuum problem and go to fill that vacuum with something. So,
yeah. No, I mean, I'm not a fan of what they're doing in terms of their choice. I've put out a blog of what I would do if I were king, and it's quite a bit different than what they're proposing. But they have, Jen even said this 2 years ago. I asked her, what is the main document people should look at? And she said, it's these cybersecurity performance goals. So this is logical based on their approach. And everything that we have in those goals, or I shouldn't say everything, my estimate is about 70% is unproven. We don't really know if it'll make a difference or not, but
in theory, they've got numbers behind that. Yeah, now I've talked to some in the mix, and in theory, they based a lot of those on engagements they've done, incident response efforts they've done, and other visibility, we'll call it, that they've got firsthand into their world. So I would say it's not just a grab bag of stuff. It actually was based on some, arguably their own visibility and their own metrics, but it was based on something there. So I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying I do know that much.
Well,
there's a lot of warts on the CPGs. Yeah.
Well, so the first goal that we talked about would say, are you implementing what we say you should be implementing? That one is pretty straightforward. The second one is more interesting, is if you implement what you say if you're implementing what you say you should be doing, are you reducing cyber incidents, or more important, the impact of cyber incidents? And I'm not sure that's the one that I don't know about. But another one here that I thought was really good: reduction in the time to remediate known exploited vulnerabilities across critical infrastructure and government networks.
Yeah, that's the Kev list. And that's good. I like that one. I got to say, I'm a fan of that one.
Well, and it's time to remediate. I don't know if they meant the time for the vendor to come out with a solution, which would be one time, or if they meant the time for the asset owners to implement that solution.
Yeah.
And I'd actually want to collect both those numbers, but I like this. This is good stuff if they actually do it.
I think it's the latter, but I agree. I would like to see both because I think the vendors are getting better and they're going to get better as more of this comes out. But that kev list has been a major driver for a lot of things. It's been a very positive impact on the space, not just in our critical infrastructure sectors, but also in the government sector as well, which can be a very large motivator for, if you're selling into the federal government, if it's been done there, it can also be done everywhere else. So it has a tendency to be that bellwether or minimum benchmark for a lot of other areas. So we get to benefit from that in the critical infrastructure spaces because those federal spaces are required to do it.
Hey, Liz, put up that Patrick Miller fanboy comment. We got to give Patrick a little bit of credit here.
Thank you,
LinkedIn out there.
Whoever this may be. Much appreciated.
Let's see. I did want to highlight, though, that I wasn't a fan of all of them. So, for example, one of the bad measures of effectiveness I saw was increase in the volume of unique, timely, and relevant information shared by industry or government partners through our persistent collaboration channels. I always get worried about volume metrics, that we're going to share more information. I saw that with the CRIS program, for example. One of their metrics is the number of indicators they send out to the number of utilities participating. And to me, that measures, I guess, the effectiveness of your implementation of the security control, but not the effectiveness of the security control or the measure you're taking. So there's a couple I'm worried about. I understand why they're there, but I'm not a fan of all of them.
No, I agree with you. That one stood out to me as well. I was really curious to hear which ones rubbed you the wrong way. And we both hit on that one. I didn't like that because it's just a measure of how much implementation you have or how many licenses you've sold. I'm sorry, but that's a sales metric. That's not a metric of are you actually affecting the security threshold. I did not like that one at all. No.
I mean, we used to see that one with ICS cert back when it existed, that number of bulletins issued or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, is that
but
good?
it's such an arbitrary number because when the threat landscape changes, we see whether it's a geopolitical issue or many other things can impact the number of things that go up and down in terms of exploited vulnerabilities, threat actors on the play field. All these things are so arbitrary. And honestly, I mean, one of my biggest rubs, and I've been on your stage to rant about it before. Thank you for the airtime. But a lot of this isn't information sharing because sharing is voluntary. This is not voluntary. Let's stop calling it sharing. Let's call it something else. But information transfer, information taking, call it what you want, but we need to stop calling it sharing because that's just lipstick. It's not sharing. It's not voluntary.
I sense some past scars there in that comment, but let me throw one more out at you. This one wasn't one I disliked. I just found it very interesting. Reduction in the number of vulnerabilities disclosed without appropriate coordination or provision of necessary mitigations. So this is, they threw out a classic vulnerability disclosure war or discussion that always comes out, but they're saying no, what they would probably, they use the word responsible, I think. You don't.
This is vendor liability.
People. Yeah.
I read vendor liability in that one.
I wouldn't say that. I think this one is more on like the people like back in Project Basecamp days. We would have gotten hit there, or they want to reduce people just disclosing things without coordinating it with them. Is at least part of
I read that differently. Yeah, I read that differently, but I can see where God, I hope it's both.
It is. It does appear to be both. Without appropriate coordination is one, or provision of necessary mitigations, which is, as Ron says, it's the forever day clause.
Right. So I hope it's both, and not because I'm in one camp or the other for disclosure approaches, but because I think we need to have more and healthier conversations on what to do about this. But pretending it's not a problem is not going to solve it. Ignoring it is not going to solve it. We're going to have those really difficult, painful discussions to figure out which path is best or better, right? I mean, but we got to do something. I mean, acting like it's not a problem is making the situation worse. So I like that. I thought that was useful, but I thought that as far as measures go, that's a difficult one to measure because which of those, because we just talked about two components, it's the researchers and the vendors. How are you going to measure those? Is it just releases or days? That's a tough one.
Well, I think you could measure that. You just have to have your measurement criteria set in advance. You have to say, this is what we're going to consider in which bucket. But
Yeah.
before we, do you have anything else on this before we move to topic 2?
In general, I got to say, I'm still, I'm not as big a critic as you are of CISA, but I'm still a critic. And I do think that there's a lot of, I don't want to say empire building. I think it's more of dump truck problem that they've got because it's like, I see this in big enterprises where everyone's like, oh crap, that's security stuff. We have no idea what that is. It's probably witchcraft and voodoo. I don't want to learn it. Who does that for us? Great. Pin it on them. That's typical for larger enterprises. And I think they're kind of suffering from that same thing. And it's created some challenges for them. But in general, I'm feeling better about some of these things. I do think that they could benefit a lot from. They're doing a good job. I don't want to say they're not doing a good job of engaging with the stakeholders in industry to get better feedback. More of that, so they get more feedback, more real situations, real things, and help. My biggest push is for these measures, get some objective input on what that looks like and produce results. Be transparent. Or to us, we're going to start ignoring this. We're going to say, okay, these are fake measures, and it's just going to be another thing to ignore.
Yeah, I think in the ICS world, because they do work outside of the ICS world, I would advise them less and measure. Do less, put out less, and measure what you're doing. Okay, topic 2. And topic 2 and 3 are shorter for those of you on here. We will go a half hour on those, but we had some activity in the marketplace. Cisco bought Splunk for $28 billion. Splunk lost $278 million last year and has been losing money, $1.3 billion, $900 million, $331 million the last few years. SCADAfence got acquired by Honeywell. Dragos raised $74 million in a extension, a de-extension round, which means basically in October 2021, they sold equity at a valuation of 1.7 million. About 2 years later, they sold more equity at the same valuation. So you can read that good and bad. We've had layoffs, some public, many more hidden. You probably have heard a lot. I've heard the large consulting firms have trimmed back quite a bit on their staff, or people have left, and the ones that are there are moving to other projects. So with all these things happening, what do you think's driving this kind of retrenchment or slide back in the sector?
There's a few things, having dealt with enough executives, a lot of this was just for the optics, I got to say. There were some healthy companies that really didn't need to scale back, but did because they could. And in some executive positions, this is to get rid of arguably Deadwood that you probably need to get rid of, but you needed a reason. And this is a good reason. So there are organizations that wait to pull those triggers given market conditions. So there's often that effect.
Yeah, just stop there for a second. And you know, there's probably some listeners who probably were let go. You know, and I know what you mean by Deadwood, but I'd characterize it slightly different. That they've been hiring.
Oh, no, I was characterizing it from the executive perspective. That's how they see it.
Yeah. But they were hiring so fast for the last few years, in almost across the department, across all companies. You know, someone might not be a fit for that job. They might have said, hey, we didn't need this many people in tech support. We needed more in development or vice versa. I think it was more of, we were hiring without, you know, a lot of consideration. And now they've learned some things and they said, these are the part. So it is Deadwood in the sense you're trimming the tree of the things that are not helping you grow. But, you know, I don't think it was necessarily that, that a lot of the people that were let go were not talented contributors. They just weren't a fit for this fast growth model.
Right, and that's a good distinction, and thank you for adding that. You're absolutely correct. And I got a lot of things. Is the market tanking, a lot of questions when this was happening. It's like, oh my God, is the market going down? Are we, is the, can we stop? I saw a post like, stop firing the money cannon at, cyber. And I think if anything, it was more or less just a correction for those very reasons you articulated, is that we grew so fast that this wasn't a shift in, is this a good thing to do, or does this make sense from an investment perspective? Is we really overdid things for a while, and frankly, it was overvalued in a lot of ways. And this is more of just a correction, which is natural and should be expected. Now, did the correction go a little too far in some places? Yeah, but that's also to be expected as well. It's not easy to get those things perfect or get them right. And especially if there's other optics that you're dealing with, like the market, it is rather frozen for, gosh, I'd say the last year or more. I've seen a lot of organizations really struggling, not just on the staffing component, but on sales and raising new funding. And it's been a struggle for all. And I've gotten lots of questions as, when is this going to happen? Is this, like I say, is this an indicator? And no, it's more or less just a natural course correction. And I've seen some organizations have grown at the same time. So I would love to say there's like one thing, like this is the cause or this is the thing, but it's much more dynamic than that. But some of the bigger motivators really, I do think, were that natural correction and a lot of the overvalue of our situation.
Well, and Brandon Workington has something saying, that this was great for some new people looking for. It was a very tough market to hire people, and you had some real talent out there. So, I think I don't know of too many people that have had trouble finding a job. You never know whether it's the job they want or the job they had to take. But that's the thing. I would say on the cutting, you said they might have cut too deep, but that's kind of the advice you're given, right? The advice you're given is cut too deep because you don't want to have to cut twice. You think I need to go this deep, I'm going to cut deeper, and that way people know it's over and everyone that's left is surviving. I might, I don't know if it's disagree with you, but I might think that the macroeconomic issue had a bigger role than what you've described. I think that.
What do you mean?
Well, just the fact that tech is down. Tech across the board is down. A lot of companies are retrenching. I know a lot of large companies are.
It depends on the tech, because AI tech is up. AI tech is up. It depends on the tech. Tech is just as strong as ever. It just, some areas kind of shifted. Because there's crazy, silly investments in some areas, and there's other areas that are relaxed. And it's not that there's like a finite pool of money, but there is a finite pool of money. And if they see something that's a shinier object that looks like it's more profitable, then they're going to go there too. But I think even in terms of some of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I say it's down, I'm thinking that the purchasing by the asset owners of technology and of everything, I think those people are a lot of the sectors are facing budget pressure. Now, regulated utilities probably not so much, but things more like manufacturing and things like that, if they're seeing a slowing market, if they're seeing inflation affect what they're paying for people, they're getting pushed down. And I know of many cases where people have said one of the common things I've read in press releases is the projects haven't gone away; they've just been delayed. That's what I hear.
I've heard the same. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of the as you mentioned, the regulated markets are definitely different than the unregulated ones. And in the regulated markets, they've been trying to buy this tech for years, and we just barely got out of some supply chain issues to where they could finally buy some of the tech. So it's a complex mix, and I for those ones that are buying, I've seen they're having challenges getting the equipment they need, getting it in the time they need. Even some of the VARs and resellers, they've shrank, so they're having issues with their resellers and getting good service to just buy their equipment. I've seen massive delays in some spaces. I've seen they're still buying as much as they can, but the market is shifted in some ways where it's making it more challenging for them to even buy. So there's a lot of subtlety in this. It really isn't one thing, but it is happening.
And what do you think this means for acquisitions? Like over the next 6 to 12 months, do you think we're going to see more companies kind of like skate a fence, say, we can't raise more money? I shouldn't say it. I don't know for a fact that they couldn't, but I'm sure they were faced with a tough raise. probably running out of runway and having to make some hard decision, and they decided best way out is to sell out. Do you think that's going to happen for more vendors?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, really, without question, this is going to happen. And you've seen a lot of them when they were doing cuts and they cut back a little too far. That was not, just because that's how you do this. It's also to get your value to a certain position in P&E looking good for IPO or other takeover of some kind, M&A, PE purchase. So yeah, those are all standard methods. And when they're all reacting the same way, it looks very similar to how these trends typically occur from an economic perspective. So you would expect, given all of those conditions, since they are all indicative of those things, that would be the end result of those approaches. Yeah.
And I wonder, I wouldn't be surprised. It's not going to be my prediction, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see more of the ICS vendors, your Siemens, your Schneider Electrics, your Honeywell, Emerson, Rockwell, being some of the purchasers, because they've all gone into the consulting and managed service practice, and they can also deploy some of these that if the prices get right, they might be the ones that jump in. We might see more like that Honeywell acquisition.
Yeah, and they've all already done this. They've already tried this a few times with OEMing some of these solutions inside their security suites. So they've already tried that, and for them, it's just easier to wait until the market slows a little bit, and they're looking for a purchaser or equity sale, and they can come in and buy a stake or buy the whole thing. Either way, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Well, and many of them are already investors in these companies, so their venture arms have funded some of those. So it could just be almost a bailout. Hey, we're going to lose our investment, or we can put a little more in and get it all. So we'll have to see that. Let's jump to our third topic, and I don't even know what's left to say on this, but ransomware. We had Port in Nagoya. Last week we had Clorox. Well, actually, we don't know for a fact that Clorox was ransomware. They haven't said what it was, but I mean, odds are it was ransomware.
Why wouldn't it be, right?
Yeah. Hospitals. Beyond, I've just been stressing for years that the date, or not years, but at least a year, that the data is real clear that your most likely impact to operations of a cyber attack is ransomware and IT. So if you haven't done your incident response plan to make sure the impact of that is acceptable, I don't know why you're spending money on anything else in 2023. Do you have any other new thoughts or anything on ransomware?
I've got some, but first, I'm sorry, why? I mean, really, this is 2023. Ransomware has been a raging freaking tire fire in the middle of this situation for so long now that if you got the ransomware problem wrong again this late, shame on you. I mean, I know it's hard. Don't get me wrong. I get how hard it is, but this is an issue. This is a problem. And we've got some, not perfect, we got a lot of really good, decent approaches to minimize the impact on this. So whenever I see one of these and I see it take down operations, I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. But first of all, off my soapbox. I do think there are some approaches that we could look at. Of course, always regular plug for the cyber-informed engineering. I'm sorry, we got to work more on actually designing these systems this way. Legacy, I get it, it's a challenge, backward-looking. Forward-looking, there are some really, really solid approaches. If you're greenfielding or rebuilding or retrofitting, you've got some really, really good approaches. They're not as cheap as the original methods, but again, neither is ransomware. So, okay, do the math. But I do think other things like doing those dependency analyses so that you can island off your critical stuff quickly. You can do the shear away networks and all those things that you need to do to keep your operation limping along as needed. And then, of course, standard blocking and tackling needs to be done. You shouldn't be focusing on, a neighborhood watch threat intelligence program if you're not locking the doors or patching the vulnerabilities. So if you're not going to lock your doors, don't worry about an alarm. So those things. And then the last piece is I still see everybody kind of hand waving the incident response stuff. And it is like the most important thing you could possibly do right now. Aside from standard ransomware mitigation efforts, if you're not practicing for when it hits the fan, again, it's happening all around us every day. Massive, seriously impactful financial, other in some cases even like infrastructure impacts, and we're still not practicing and getting this taken care of. But that said, I want to plug a presentation I gave on your stage about the fact that everything got hacked and no one cared. I mean, what we're effectively seeing is that very thing. There have been major incidents, very costly. Executives have lost their jobs. People have been impacted directly, and we still have the same problem happening every single day. So I think it's probably, if we're not going to get individual organizations to motivate themselves to do this, I'm not saying regulation is necessarily the key, and it'll be more of a community-based approach. But we need to look at things like, where do we get things like building codes, sprinkler systems installed, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, fire marshals doing inspections. Corollary, obviously, this is an analogy. And then for when you've done all the right things, you do get a benefit on your insurance and that kind of thing. So we don't have anything like that right now. It really is pushed out to each organization to kind of fend for themselves. So though I complain about them, for lagging on it, they also, should get some. I mean, the situation shouldn't be this bad that they have to do all the lifting themselves. Okay, I'll give you a chance to talk and rant.
No, yeah, Liz, I was going to ask you to put up that comment. Thanks. I just think most of the action is on the consequence side on this.
Yeah.
Is you just have to, and I don't think it's a hard sale anymore to executive management. You just show them the Clorox press release or the Clorox 8Ks that say it had a material effect on their thing, and it says we have to assume that ransomware is going to get on our IT network. Is the impact of ransomware on our IT network acceptable? Now we're going to hate it. It's a failure. We're going to investigate it, try to do better. But if our manufacturing is down for 2 days, maybe that's acceptable. That happens from time to time. But if it's going to be down or degraded for 2 months, that's unacceptable. And if it's unacceptable, what do we have to spend? What do we have to do to get it in that acceptable range? And it's not that difficult. And I don't think it's a difficult sale. And it may even be, as you said, a career limiting decision on what you do with this. If you haven't done this and it hits you, you can't say, "Oh, I'm shocked. I didn't know this could happen." It's like we've had so many incidents now. So to me, it's something that I don't understand why people are, as I say, spending time and money on other things if they don't have this completely under control.
Yeah, and to Malika's point on there, it isn't just the ransomware and your operation is down. They steal your proprietary information. They steal all of your crown jewels, and then they extort you for that. So it's more than just your operation being down. There's a much, much larger intangible impact on that as well.
Oh, exactly. Although the response could be very different.
True.
So, or the action you take, like the action you take for operations going down, there are concrete things you can do. The other ones, right. I don't play in that world anymore. So I really don't understand what the right thing is to do there. But you're right. It is just as serious, and another reason why you can get funding to deal with that very real, proven, not hypothetical, not FUD threat.
No. We actually have like real actuarial metrics on this, like hard data. Yeah.
Okay, let's get to wins, fails, and predictions. And if you're in the audience here, we'd love to hear your win or fail from the quarter. But Patrick, I'll start with you. What was your win for Q3?
My win and my fail is the same thing. Can I do that? Is that
sure.
Okay? Am I breaking the rules? Okay.
No,
my win and my fail is the same thing. It's the DOE's Caesar Group and RMUC. They released a prize package for the small electric utilities. And it's a fair amount of money. So what I like is that this is actually being done in a way that doesn't come with, it does come with some overhead for some, but it's not that hard to get additional funding. So it does help those smaller utilities that don't have a lot of resources, or it's more challenging for them to get resources, primarily because they're not like an investor in utility. They don't have a rate case to go get money back from a customer. They actually have a completely different funding model, especially things like the municipals. But it is open to a wider range. It's not just the cooperatives, it's the munis and state and local federations and tribals. So I think that as a win in recognizing that they need funding, and it was targeted in, I would argue, some good spots. So to me, that was a win. What was the fail part of it was that it was done, and to add to the win is there's another funding opportunity announcement coming soon. there was a lot of work that went into getting this money released. So
Mhm.
I know what it took to make this happen. So without getting into all those details, that in and of itself is a massive win, because it's not easy to get this kind of funding released to these organizations with this little overhead. The fail part of it for me, there's a lot, is that it's awarded as prizes. It does come with a significant amount of babysitting from the federal grant components, or the federal
Mm.
allocation of the funds components. So a lot of these smaller organizations don't have the administrative capacity to manage that. So they may have to get outside resources to help with it. It's not as big as most others, so that part is still a win, but it's still just a little bit too much. It's gonna raise the difficulty level and the friction. That's going to create a little bit more of an obstacle for all of them that could have received it. So great job getting it out there. Difficult thing to do. Just really could have been a little less friction on it to get it implemented. And then the just the fact that it's a prize. I mean, it's kind of there's a lot of silliness that went around how this is going to be released. The last piece I'll go on in terms of the fail is it
Can I
does
ask you a
require.
question on that?
Sure. Yeah.
Would there have been other government vehicles that would have been less burdensome? I've only done
Yeah.
one type of government contract, and it was burdensome. So, but are
I've done
there
that.
would have been other ways that they could have just said, "Here's the money. Here's what you said you're going to do with it. Go do it."
Yeah, yeah. They've got a lot of
Okay.
different options. Yeah, there's a wide range of options they can choose from, and I know that it's more difficult to get those options on the table for them. But they fought really hard to get the money. I think they should have put that same amount of effort into getting it dispersed in an appropriate way, in an easier way. So, I mean, great job, hard job, well done, really hard fought battle. But that last little piece may be the horseshoe nail that takes down the entire battle, for
Yeah.
some.
Okay.
Um, and then
Okay.
the last piece is it does come with a significant amount of information sharing as well. And again, it's not sharing if it's required. So there's a lot of additional data that they're going to be giving up that some of them may not be comfortable with as well. So there's some great things, and there's some really interesting friction points that may end up causing it. I don't want to say to fail, but to give it a lot less reach than it really was intended to get.
Yeah, that's one of the measures that I've really been trying to get more information on, and I tried at S4 both with Director Kumar and
Good
the CEO
job.
of
I
Berkshire
think you did a
Hathaway
great job
Energy.
on that.
I was like,
Yeah,
has it made any difference? Do we have any metrics saying it's stopped an attack, reduced consequence? The information sharing always sounds good, but I really would like to get some objective measure that it's actually making a difference. Because you know what happens when information sharing isn't working? There's just more calls for more information sharing.
right.
It's like,
That's
oh,
somehow
we're
the
not.
reason things aren't working. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the same with a lot of these government detection programs. They're not working. We need more. So
yes.
I'd like to get some measure of that. Um, that's great. My win was it's kind of a minor win, but I was really happy to see Johnson Controls come out with a BACnet, a secure version of BACnet. So now they have a
Yes.
rapid and TLS. Now, not so much for the encryption, but the implicit authentication you get with that. BACnet, one of the most exposed protocols out there, because a lot of these building automation systems are sitting on the enterprise network, not in OT, separate OT networks.
Mhm.
So now you have a choice, at least with a new system from Johnson Controls. You can say, well, maybe I can't get the funding to move it to OT, but at least these commands that could turn things on and off and reprogram things can at least be encrypted and authenticated. So to me, that's a
Yeah,
win.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Cheers.
fa- fails a little tougher. I should also say I've mentioned it earlier, but I think those CISA measures of effectiveness are a win. But I think I've made that pretty clear. I was a fan of those. Fail. I had two fails actually. I couldn't choose between them, both government related. One fail was Kemba Walden not being made the national cyber security director. She seemed the community seemed to be really happy with her. She seemed to be doing a good job. There was some information out there that it was based on her debt, that she had too much debt, which just sounds kind of silly as to why you would do that. I don't know that we really know the real reason, but I think she would have been good for the OT sector. I think she had some experience and knowledge, and she was in place and more continuity. I think that would have been better. I don't know about this new individual that's going to take the role. I don't know anything about him. It didn't sound like he had a lot of OT background, but to me, that was a fail. My other fail was CISA killing off ICS JWG. And ICS JWG was going so badly that it probably deserved to be shot. I mean, I was at this Salt Lake meeting. It was really pretty bad. Not that the speakers didn't do a good job or the attendees didn't get anything, but just the energy behind it. They didn't even send their keynote speaker live. He did it, via Zoom or something like that. But I just saw we got rid of ICS CERT. We got rid of ICS JWG. We're now this specialty area now. We're supposedly playing a role in JCDC, but it is unique in certain ways. I think it deserved some special effort. It didn't have to be ICS JWG, but the fact that there is not a specialized OT area in CISA to me is a fail. I think we lost something there.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to see, and there's several of us that have been trying to ask for or push for, if it's going to go to JCDC, can we at least get some people at a minimum that we know we can go to within JCDC, or can we get like a task force or something under JCDC that gives OT some specificity and some understanding? Because even with the CPGs, when they came out, they were all IT. So everything they're doing, we always have to keep coming back and reminding them about OT. We need to know who those champions are in the organization to continue to empower them to wave that OT flag and say, hey, OT, don't forget us. We've still got some important skin in this game. I agree on both of them. Yeah. And I was shocked that Kemba didn't get it. She's got a phenomenal track record. I was really surprised to see that. So I think that is a fail as well.
Even just from a momentum standpoint. Even if you said the two were peers, you just this now, and also we have to wait till he gets approved, and now her ability to get things done is probably lesser because she's not the official, she's acting and such. Anyways, did you have a prediction for?
I do.
It can be for next quarter, it can be longer range, but what's your prediction?
I'm going to make it. I'm hoping for next quarter, but it might not. I'm starting to see. And this is going to freak some people out, so just make sure you're sitting down and put your coffee down. I'm going to be a heretic for a minute. Operations in the cloud, like real SCADA operations in the cloud, real things like EMS in the cloud, and yes, even for things like bulk electric system, critical electric utilities operating in the cloud. And I say that because I'm actually seeing some hardware, software vendors looking at how to do this, and not just in a we want to push it to market because we think it's a thing, but in a real methodical, within the regulations way that fits the utilities structure and model and culture. I'm actually seeing real things, like real solutions, not just this, we should put SCADA in the cloud because cloud and faster and reliable and all that marketing nonsense. It's legit, solid, engineering-based approaches. At the same time, I'm even seeing regulatory bodies such as NERC, even because originally these were just flat no from a regulatory perspective, not even a consideration. There was a white paper floated from the sites group that came out. It got a no, but it didn't get a no and don't come back. It got a no, here's some things, and you can come back with some ideas. So we're seeing kind of the two ends of the spectrum working on this, and it looks like this is not just a pie in the sky, you're just pushing tech too fast, tap the brakes, heretic moment, that these are real viable options for some of these organizations. So that's my prediction is we're going to see this sooner than you think or want.
In the electric sector?
I think it'll start there, but that's just going to be the tip of the iceberg.
Well, it's already happening in water.
Yeah,
so water's doing it. Some manufacturing is doing it. And I do wonder, I think you're right. I mean, time frame. Directionally, you're definitely right. It's kind of the problem I have a lot of time with predictions is I sometimes overestimate how fast things will happen. Not sometimes, I often overestimate how fast things will happen. But you could even see some halfway things where you could say our primary control center is in the cloud. Maybe our secondary is in the cloud, and we have a tertiary in case the cloud's not available. or we have some minimum capability. You could have some mix and
Yeah.
match there and have some, okay, what happens if the cloud's not available? We have some capability locally to do it. Because when you think about it, failover on the cloud is going to exceed anything you can do locally, because they move that stuff around so easily.
And what I'm seeing actually is the reverse. I'm seeing they'll do their primary and backup control centers on premise, like they typically do for the electric sector specifically. So they're looking at doing their primary and backup control centers like they currently do on premise. And then just in case something like ransomware or some other operational impact hits their OT networks, they can fail over to a cloud operation to limp along and get schedules done and do the minimum necessary to operate from a cloud instance as well. So that's one of the, I guess, probably more viable approaches that I've seen so far. And it looks, like I say, it looks legit from an architecture, logistics, regulations, culture. It looks like it's starting to fire on all cylinders.
Okay. My prediction is a little half prediction, half challenge. My prediction is we will not see CISA come out with numbers for any of the measures of effectiveness I read in this podcast prior to S4. And the reason it's a little bit of a challenge is because I also have a standing invite in to Jen Easterly to come back for another interview on it. But I did say that was the main topic I wanted to talk about, is how they are measuring their success, how they are failing forward, and that sort of thing. Liz, let's finish off. Let's put Brandon's fail up. I always like it when people put wins and fails in. My fail would be the executive who told someone in the meeting where they laid him off that getting laid off was good because the experience would build character. I shouldn't laugh at that, but I can't believe someone would actually say that. If you're lucky enough to be an executive at a company, don't be an asshole. I'm going to trust you, Brandon, that someone actually said that. That to me,
I've heard it. Yeah, I've heard it. It's a real thing. It happens.
I have told people afterwards that sometimes years later they might find out it was the best thing that ever happened, because that's actually common. Is you get forced out of a job, it forces you to go somewhere else, and things actually get better. That's pretty common, but I would never say that to someone as I was letting them go, that this is going to be good for you.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good one.
There's a lot of bad managers. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll put it in the show notes too, Patrick, but you have a podcast out now. What's that podcast called?
Critical Assets Podcast. I've only got probably 5 or so episodes, I think. And it's not like I wish I had the rigor to actually get it done on a regular basis. It's just when I find something interesting and I find someone who was interesting to talk about. The last one was with Danielle Jablonski, and we did what you did similar, where we said if we were basically leader for a day, we could make one regulation, and then we could only make one, obviously arbitrary constraints, but what would it be? So yeah, and it's primarily dedicated toward industrial security components, regulatory things. You know my role. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great. And
thanks.
And then you're still somewhat active on Twitter. I see you put up your post. But if someone wanted to communicate with you, what's the best place for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, if you can catch me on Twitter before it crashes into the ground, flaming into a pile, I would say LinkedIn is probably easier. I'm on Mastodon. I'm on Blue Sky. Patrick C. Miller on any platform, and you're likely going to hit me. Yeah.
Okay, Patrick. Well, enjoy Europe. Enjoy Bilbao. That's one of my favorite places in the world.
Yes.
And thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, as always, Joe. Pleasure.
Okay. Well, we're going to end the live podcast now. As always, if you have suggestions for guests or comments, s4@digitalbond.com, and you'll get a recorded version next week. Bye.